So what have we got? We've got two systems that are near identical at the spec sheet. 10 teraflops versus 12 teraflops, and all the people who are white belt consumers who know, oh yeah, bigger numbers are better. We all know that. But it's not true. In the IT world, you kind of got to understand the chips involved. And when we look in the current marketplace, the reason why Microsoft are buying up all these first-party developers, it's incorrect. The reason you have first parties are to bring, when you bring your platform to market, nobody else has written software for it. Generally, nobody else knows that the hardware exists. Well, that's kind of what you want. You want to develop your hardware in secret and then release it. And so your first-party developers are the people who you can give the development tools to build software for it without the whole world knowing about it. And so traditional first-party studios, the only reason they exist is to show off hardware features 100% in your first-gen software. People who've had a longer chance to play with said hardware and make stuff good for said hardware platform. So when we look at the current market, we've got Microsoft just snapping up first-party developers, and it's for all the wrong reasons. Okay, their platforms are already out, right? They're already late to the game. If they're trying to get these guys to make software for their platform, it's a response to the market that they know that they've lost. They know that they need to buy these people to write software for their ecosystem. And you might think, like he doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay, fine. Let me throw some numbers at you, right? Because apparently the Xbox people like their numbers, and they like their numbers bigger. Okay, so here's some big numbers for you. We talk about backwards compatibility. In the Xbox ecosystem, you say, we've got backwards compatibility all the way to the 90s, right? In the 90s, right, we used tube TVs that had basically 0 millisecond response time for red, green and blue to hit the screen all at the same time. Photons of light literally being shot out of a cathode ray tube, just so quick. So there was no response time. You didn't have to program your games with this concept. There was a lag and a delay at every step of the way, right? So we had cutting edge responsive games. And those games don't a lot of those games don't transition well to LCD monitors or laggy monitor types that we have in the modern world. And game developers have customised to that in the last 20 years by knowing that there's a wireless delay to get to your wireless controller, knowing that your TV is not going to switch red, green and blue layers all at the exact same moment, or there might be a millisecond delay there that's quite significant, 14 milliseconds I think. Sort of, most consumers wouldn't have a sub 20 millisecond response time screen. But you combine all these latencies combined. And so there's lots of latencies. If you're playing an online game, you've got network latency, and if you've got wireless controllers, there might be a small latency there, and all these latencies add up. But yeah, you don't play a game from the 90s on a modern screen. If it was a cutting-edge game like Sonic the Hedgehog or even Mario Brothers. I know they're not on either of the platforms I'm sort of talking about, but trying to not be controversial. It was millisecond timing back then, and we don't really have that now. But the screen resolutions were really low in the 90s. The graphics output wasn't anything special, and most of those games over the course of the last 15 years or so have all been remastered anyway. If that was a good game, a lot of them have been remastered. And you'll find that when you look at your backwards compatibility on an Xbox system, sometimes there's the version of the game on the Xbox, there's a version of the game on the Xbox 360, there's a version of the game on the Xbox One, and so having a new version of the game probably inbound on the Xbox Series, that might happen. But you've got backwards compatibility if you really want. You can go back and play the original game, or you can play the one on the 360, or maybe they haven't been redone. You try and find a copy of Outrun 2006. I think Sega didn't have the license for Ferrari anymore. That's a game I'd want backwards compatibility for. That was a great game. But this notion of backwards compatibility is not everything that the marketing would tell you it is. Because if you look at all of the backwards compatibility that Microsoft has, because nobody's been writing software for them for the last generation, so console as a market is just constantly going up. And so there's more and more games being made every year as an industry just grows and grows and grows. And so by Microsoft having such little output in the Xbox One generation, the developers and all the people that jumped ship, all the developers that jumped ship to Sony PlayStation during that time, PlayStation 4, there's so much software that came out on the PlayStation 4. So if you look at Sony not doing backwards compatibility, but because their architecture is the same on PS5 as it was on PS4, basically, it's more powerful. PS5 is more powerful. It can easily backwards compatibility with PS4. The backwards compatibility Sony get just going back to PS4 is like 4,500 titles. There might be 4,000 titles in total on Microsoft's backwards compatibility going back all of their generations. And whether that's a good thing or not, were the games written in widescreen back in the day, or are these games, are the multimedia budgets of games from the 90s, anything that in the modern world gamers want to play. Well, I would argue as a gamer, yeah, look, games are always about gameplay. You know, gamers played games, not platforms. You know, like we platform war, there's no shit of console war. That's not a gamer thing. That's a couple of kids in the playground going, my dad bought a better console than your dad bought, or something. You know, these wars have happened all throughout history. You know, it was football teams back when I was going to school. We all collected football cards. You know, not everybody had. I had an Atari, but not everybody had. Not everybody had the toys and the tech back then. You know, we actually played games. We actually looked at people's faces. And, yeah, times are great. Yeah, we might get the cane, actual discipline. We learnt manners and respect, sometimes courtesy too, but yeah, different times. So look, when we look at the Microsoft ecosystem, they now basically get their developers to choke out their games. You've got to program your game in such a way that it's going to look bad on the competitor's platform. And I'll use the example of loading times. So at the moment, Microsoft's got a speed bump with the current Xbox Series generation. And they're leveraging that CPU power to basically do compression. So if you compress using your CPU, and you've got a CPU advantage, and your drive's not that quick, you might be able to gain back some speed. And we see that in these first-gen titles. But down the track, right, and it's not going to happen on the Microsoft side of the coin because there's too many consoles and they're going to have new consoles coming in anytime shortly to get consumers to buy more speed again. But the PlayStation hardware is superlative, and it'll operate for, it'll be about the year 2030. On current trajectories, all the best minds in the industry have said, oh, by the time the PC market standardises a lot of these features they're in a PlayStation 5, you know, it's a fair way away before developers are actively writing for it. You need to have a certain amount of hardware sold for people to actually write for what is. And so the PlayStation 5 is an incredible forward-thinking piece of hardware with a lot of stuff going on in it, but that's not the point of my diatribe right now. It's really, I'm trying to say, look, buy these guys because, you know, the competition just isn't worth considering. And it's not just that they're killing the gaming market in the process of being in the gaming market. Microsoft will keep throwing. They've got deep pockets. They will take money from other branches of their business, and they haven't made money in gaming for a long time. But they'll try to float because they know that the ends justifies the means. Ultimately, they'll make money. There's a lot of money attached to gaming, so they will buy studios and they will do some really underhanded tactics if need be to stay in the game, and that's at the detriment of gamers everywhere. Okay, now if you're a developer working for a company that's told, you know, optimise for these specs or optimise for this because the competitors are going to have a hard time doing that, programmers don't like that. There's a reason why all these IPs that Microsoft own, apparently, like for example Halo, it's not Bungie anymore. I mean, that was a pretty big fell blow by PlayStation last week to go, oh, we've acquired Bungie. And whether people like Destiny or Destiny 2 and they go, it's an online game, I didn't play it, or there might not be a connection. Some people put a lot of time into Destiny and then sort of went, oh, that's too addictive. I'm gonna crowbar myself away from that product. You know, but Bungie is not Destiny. Bungie is creative, incredible geniuses who make incredible software. So there's a bit of a up yours statement from Sony, from Sony to Microsoft to say, yeah, we know what gamers want. Games. But I mean, look, if we want to talk about platforms, let's. For all those people out there going, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Oh, he's talking negatively about my precious console, the Xbox. And don't get me wrong, an Xbox Series S is cheap. If one was put under your tree at Christmas time, you're doing wonderfully well. You're going to enjoy lots of great games. You know, okay, this here is factual. It's the industry stuff. It's got nothing relevant to gaming, right? You enjoy a game, and Pac-Man, Space Invaders. These games existed in the 70s. Weren't really graphical powerhouses. Didn't need lots of megahertz to make them be fun, and fun is what it's all about. So I've got my seat back now. I can do my regular videos. So I'm probably going to stop this channel shortly, this video shortly, and get on with the stuff I've actually got to do. But look, so what have we got? On the PlayStation side of the coin, we've got a lot of things that aren't just spec sheet bragging rights. Okay, we've got highly customised hardware. We've got this injection system that can actually take the super fast storage beyond anything that anyone's really writing for on the planet. You know, this is incredible. It can literally, in the time that you turn around in game, can load in a whole world behind you. You know, so in terms of when you can leverage that much throughput for the graphics immediately in front of you, okay, you can go, well, nobody's writing games for this yet. No, nobody is, But you wait till VR comes out later this year, and they've got this foveated rendering where wherever your eyes look, using little infrared lights, they can light up your eyes and track your eyeballs and see where your eyes are going. And I've had cameras that do it. You can set your focus point. I think it was a Canon Elan 5, and you could set your focus just by looking in the viewfinder, and it would track it and set focus on that point. It was fantastic. But that was 20, 25 years ago tech type thing. And so when we find this tech in VR, right, what'll happen is wherever you look, right, and you can remember this drive can stream in the data so quick, and direct injection basically into the areas of the chip that'll actually really help get the data there. You'll literally be able to look places, and the amount of detail, right, that pathetic little 10 teraflops if you're just looking at the numbers, but that highly customised architecture will actually be able to render some pretty incredible graphics wherever you look. And we know this, right, the Unreal Engine 5, designed as a way to get around it's an extension of the Unreal Engine. I loved Unreal Tournament back in the 90s, what they could do without having dedicated hardware, video hardware. Their software rendering modes were so much better than the industry standard at the time. So Quake, if you had an OpenGL Accelerator Glide or Voodoo cards at the time, you got beautiful graphics, and or I guess NVIDIA, TNT, and ultimately GeForce, the first GeForce card. So it was TNT2, and then eventually we had GeForce. I think Digital Foundry have a first ever GPU accelerator article going around that was paid for by NVIDIA. And they're talking about the GeForce. And I'd like to think that that's because there's probably an interview stage of that, which is talking with one of the guys that was working on the GeForce 256 product. But there were video accelerators before that. And there was a lot of video accelerators in the market back then, and even good old Matrox Graphics, Canadian company. Probably they were a third-rate player in the market. There was PowerVR, which is the precursor to pre-culling technology, and we find that in all of our phones. Our phones don't have a lot of power, so that if you can just you don't have to think about the data that won't ultimately make it to the screen. You can actually make your throughput a lot more effective. And so this PowerVR technology that's been around for 20 years, it's about to become really good in a super high-powered console, no less. It's going to be incredible when we start to see games make use of it. And certainly we see in multi-platform games at the moment there might be, most of the professional reviewers are going, we can't understand why the numbers are the way they are. It's Microsoft's development tools, they're not where they need to be. We can argue all this stuff, but it's not real. Microsoft development tools, man, that's an oxymoronic process, notion. They're, how many platforms? Their development tools are just designed to spit out some software on Xbox One, Xbox One S, Xbox One Elite, if you've got a short memory, I don't know, Xbox One X, we're forgetting about these platforms. Like consumers, just look at Xbox One S, Series S, Xbox Series X, next year, Xbox Series S refresh. And then, when we still have lost the market, the consumers need a really, really big superpowered thing, Xbox Series X refresh. And Microsoft are smart enough to not put these labels for all the different products they've got in the market, or consumers that actually see just how bad the situation is. You can't write optimised software for a system that's got this much platform in it. All the cases are green, all the cases just say Xbox, and we'll include PC as the Xbox platform just so we can try and convince developers we've actually got some market share. We don't, and we'll deprecate the PC platform as quick as we can. And at the moment, Games Pass is just going to get, we'll buy gamers over to our ecosystem, and then as soon as we can, we'll shut down the PC side of the coin. And people go, no, they won't. Yeah, they will. They'll try. They won't get away with it. They probably won't now because Sony are smart enough to start to release their games on PC. Brilliant chess move right there, because everyone can see what Microsoft, anyone who cares to have a business mind to what's playing out in the market can see what Microsoft's steps will be, right? And Microsoft can't have gamers on PC, right? And the reason you build a console, the reason you invest all this money and lose money bringing a console to market is there's three pillars that make money. You make money from selling licensed hardware, right? There's a reason your old steering wheel doesn't work on the new console. Maybe the last gen, the steering wheels work on this gen, but traditionally, PS2 wheels didn't work on PS3, or it happened in all ecosystems, and you make money selling new hardware, licensed peripherals, right? You don't make it, you let these other manufacturers around the world pay a tithe to you. Thank you for building the platform. Thank you. Can I play in your ecosystem? So tithing, licensing costs for hardware and peripheral component sales. And in this case, Microsoft have really doubled down on that with they're, as far as I'm concerned, I'm a PC tech, right? And one of the costs in a solid state drive are the controller chips. And so Velocity Engine, man, as far as I'm concerned, they've just put the controller chip in the hardware, so they can sell just dumb, like basically dumb SSD drives, which is two birds in one stone. It means no other people can make an SSD drive to work in your console. They've got to be licensed products, but yeah, they can be built really cheap because the controller stays the same. It stays in the hardware. So when in the local market, $700 for an upgrade drive for an Xbox, which doesn't sell for much more than that. Is ridiculous, and I guarantee you that there's not much cost in it. If it's not what in the PC space where you've got to have a controller chip on every drive. But I tangent or I digress. So licensed peripherals, network costs, that's a big one. And they don't get that in the PC space because you don't have to play a Microsoft game. Yeah, you're playing on a Microsoft platform, but you don't have to have an annual subscription gold pass or some such to... I know that's an outdated term, that's from the 90s when Microsoft started sledging consumers for a network cost, and they used that to prop up their business network. That was so rude. The Azure network all around the world, we'll put the cost of our business network on gamers. So what have we got? The what's the third part? Selling software. Right, the one that us consumers might actually be interested in, actually having software on said platform that you might be able to make money on. So Microsoft don't have any of that going on, and traditionally everyone else does. So Microsoft will need to move gamers from PC where they don't get any of that, and at least on the console they get licensed peripheral sales, and I mean I can only hope that they're selling software. It's not really right. In the Games Pass model we all know that they're not selling, and they quote 25 million subscribers, but I mean they give away Games Pass for a year for $1 and then allow you to buy it for 2 or 3 years at that rate. You know, they're fudged numbers, they're not real. And a lot of those people, I know tons of PC gamers that buy it because it's that cheap, because it's $1. You know, and I don't really like the game. I'll try. I'll play them because I can. But I mean, Microsoft will do everything they can to deprecate games away from PC and put them on the console platform. So Sony saying, hey, we're going to put our games on PC is really good because it'll give PC gamers a chance to really double down in that ecosystem. But yeah, when we look at the platforms, you know, so we look at things like Unreal Engine, which Sony were brilliant. They invested money in Epic to make the... So Epic actually even gave feedback. With building the new Unreal Engine, they knew what they would need for a cutting-edge future engine. And they gave feedback in the design stage of the PlayStation 5. And that might be why in the processor there's like a feedback cache that can go to the video chip and the graphics chip. And in terms of what that allows in physics, right? So we've never had feedback physics. Generally, we've been trying to offshoot physics onto possibly the video card. That was an unethical industry play back in the day where Aegea Technologies built a physics processor. Right? It's going to take up a slot in your video in your computer. And so you had your central processing unit and you had your graphics processing unit, and now we have a physics processing unit. And their marketing, when they brought that to market, was that they explained about the nature of, due to the way RAM works, due to the way CPUs work, due to the way GPUs work, you can't, quite often we can do a physics-based effect, but we have to kind of wipe it from the screen quite quickly, otherwise it takes up portions of memory, and there's this lingering, eventually just burdens things down. And so the concept of these physics processors was that in the pitch, they gave us a pretty good rundown as to why having a dedicated physics processing unit was fantastic, but they were brought up overnight by a company called NVIDIA, and the technology was essentially buried. They transitioned some of the software calls to a library that would work on their graphics processing unit, so they could pretend that their graphics processing units did it. In fact, some of their early graphics processing units might have had some hardware implemented on them to essentially do aspects of the physics processing unit. I don't think it was the original Aegea capable units. But you know, numbers of crunching has gone forward in the years, and so doing physics isn't really so hard to do on a CPU. But doing physics as we've had for the last 15 years, which hasn't been that amazing, and more so because the last console generation had exceptionally potato-powered CPUs, very, very underpowered CPUs, and so the lowest common denominator is what programmers were writing for. So even in the PC space, it's like, oh yeah, but we want to release our game ultimately on the console, so we can't do advanced complex physics systems and whatnot. And so we haven't really had physics in games in a way that, not anything pushing past what Deus Ex gave us sort of in the 90s with the shoot a barrel and the shockwave would kind of go down a corridor, and you know, the physics systems as they've evolved over the years, we're getting somewhere. But by Unreal, by Epic having input on the PlayStation 5 design, what they've done with just a little bit of cache right in the middle of the APU, and I don't know if it's on the Xbox side of the coin. My understanding is they've run with full RDNA 2. You know, you fanboys, you use your full RDNA 2 argument, but just realise when you say it, you're actually really ignorant, and you're really just showing how much you don't know, and that you're just quoting marketing. You know, it's not a good thing having full RDNA 2. It's actually better having a fully customised architecture for games, mostly because it can live in the market for a very long time, and you can get Wave 2 and Wave 3 and Wave 4 games that are even more optimised, squeeze more out of the console, which is what we consumers want with our underpower, our low cost getting on of the game. You know, like consoles are great. It's what it makes. It's a common platform for everybody. And so me as a PC gamer, why did I move to console gaming? Star Wars Battlefront, right? Couldn't get a game going, right? And the amount of lack of PC gamers after that game had a few expansion packs out. The PC audience just wasn't enough. You'd sit there and there was no server browser. You couldn't actually see. You know, I could wait hours to get a game going. Once I was in the game, all 40 players in the world that were currently playing the game were in that game, and we could all enjoy it. And there might have been more than that. I'm sure there was like 30,000 players on PC, but at the same time there was like 300,000 players or 140,000 players on the PlayStation side of the coin. And of course there's generally a lot less hacking a lot less cheating on the gaming consoles. So yeah, I'm quite willing to pay a network cost, even as a PC gamer, to leave my PC to gather dust in the corner and move my gaming to console. I understand I'm giving up, you know, my dual video card setup, high-end setup that might have been in my PC, and a 64 gig of RAM, and all my super fast solid-state drives. And I've gotten around that. I put a solid-state drive on my PlayStation 3, I put a solid-state drive on my PlayStation 4, I put a solid-state drive on my PS4 Pro, and that one's actually a lot better because the buses had come along and could actually use a lot more of the speed in the solid-state drive, not just the little access time. But the modern consoles, wow, they're pretty powerful, really. This notion of doing 4K, that's an artificial number, right? PCs can do 4K, but all these current gamers are saying, oh, PC does 4K using DLSS or something. Okay, so it's not doing 4K. What is it? Is it doing 4K? Under which case it's doing 4K, or is it doing a way to you know, make the final output apparently 4K, but not really would be running at 4K? I mean, that's not really 4K, is it? So there's a reason why consoles aren't really, you know, 4K capable. And you can, if you want to run Pac-Man or Space Invaders, you could run at 8K. You know, basically every time, if you want to run a game at 60 frames a second versus 30 frames a second, well, the game at 30 frames a second can have twice as much detail as the game at 60 frames a second. There's no free lunch, right? The hardware itself can only do so much. And so if you wanted to run a game at 1080 at full high def resolution and at only 30 frames a second, I mean, it could be 8 times more graphically intense than a game that might be artificially trying to push for 4K at you know, high frame rate or something. But it'll just depend on your game. You know, race games need fast frame rates. A fast-paced shoot-'em-up game needs fast frame rates. A slow-paced role-playing game where you input your attack and then pause like a game of chess until somebody else does something. And gaming through the history, there's been a lot of times games have gone down to single frame rates. You look at Descent 3 on a PlayStation, you know, 7 frame rate lows, but quite likely 15 frame rates maybe sometimes if things are good. And it was a complex game from PC, but you know, put it on 2 megabytes RAM, 33 megahertz system. Yeah, it wasn't a powerhouse. And gamers of all throughout time had low frame rates. We accept that, you know, we put up with what we got. If the game's fun, we'll enjoy it. But ideally the developer knows what they're doing and they make the game playable. And that's what it comes down to. And usually frame time, frame pacing is the one that makes us feel it's responsive. If most modern games have an animation system where if you say you want to do something, there's a response time between when you want to do it, when you say to do it, and when the animation plays out and you start to do it. So this notion of having 60 frames a second to lower the input lag, if you will, the time from when you hit a button to when you see a response to it on the screen. And that's true, at 60 frames a second it's twice as quick responding. But if the game itself has these inherent delays between when you hit a button and when something actually happens anyway, a lot of games can be squeezed down to 30 frames a second and gamers just don't ultimately notice. More so if you're doing checkerboard rendering and stuff, there might be, you know, little visual reveals as to the fact that, oh, look, it looks better at 60. And don't get me wrong, I'm a PC gamer, man. I had 200 hertz back in the 90s, like, and higher than that if I really wanted. But you know, like 100 frames a second is really ideal. If you're a competitive, maybe a competitive fight game, you want the highest frame rate possible. If the animation system gives you an indication as to what's, you know, oh, they're about to throw that punch, cool, I'll block there. So, you know, high frame rates, competitive online shooters generally, and it is an advantage in the game. If you're a pro player, you want the least amount of lag from knowing where the competitor is at any given moment. And I say this as a person who's tried to game using a mobile phone on a high-powered computer with a couple of video cards in it and high frame rates, well above 100 frames a second. But due to my internet speed really limiting and having a latency in effect, having to just shoot in front of people, hoping that they'll just walk into my bullet. So I played Battlefield 1 as a medic for a lot of time because as a medic I could hit non-moving targets. Oh, they're on the ground and they're stationary. Cool, even if my internet's a bit laggy, I can still hit a stationary target. I wasn't an effective murderer, but I was a great healer. So yeah, look, here I'm murdering your faith in the Xbox platform right now, and I'd like to think that the people watching this have already made the decision to be pro-gaming and not pro any one large corporation that doesn't give a rat's ass about the end user. So look, Sony and Nintendo, and I should really say that the other way around. I'm in the habit of saying Sony and Nintendo, but Nintendo are absolutely fantastic. Now, they don't have all the power in the world in their current console, and they're probably due a new console refresh. Might be this year, might be next. I think it'll probably be this year. That's what we sort of understand. And that'll bring increased power, but Nintendo don't really. Historically, they've built the platform. So Miyamoto and a couple of the core boys who like write neat, fun games, they actually build the platform to realise their vision, right? So they've got an idea for a game in mind, and they go, look, we want to make this. What do we need to make that? And I think that was like the N64 with Mario type things. It is a classic example. Look, we talk about a 20% speed difference by spec sheet, right? And so let's just try and acknowledge what the speed differences currently are in this so-called console war that's going on, right? And it's never been closer, right? This is what everyone's saying, is the war's never been closer, and it's not quite true because of the fact that Sony have highly customised their hardware. And I haven't even talked about the Tempest sound engine yet, which is just so much better than Dolby Atmos audio. Well, it depends if you're into surround sound, I guess, at home, that you could say that Dolby Atmos is industry-compatible standard stuff, which was really more for cinemas and having 32 speakers or something and having 3D, like, in terms of what it does, it was built for commercial. It's been foisted into the consumer space. We don't need as many speakers in the house as cinemas do. There's a reason cinemas need that. The space of the room is quite large, but Dolby Atmos is sort of neither here nor there, but it is the current marketing term that everyone, you've got to buy that. But I was going to talk about the Velocity, the Tempest audio engine, which is just great. But before I do, let's look at specs through the ages. Okay, let's look at when there was a video game war in the early 90s, we were looking at a Super Nintendo and a Sega Mega Drive or Genesis, depending on what market you're in. And the Sega Genesis had about a 16 megahertz RISC processor. And 880, I can't believe I can't give the chip name. Man, look, it's probably not relevant to this video. But I mean, it sounded probably more important than what the competitors had, which was a 3.58 megahertz processor. Right? So if you look at 3.58 megahertz, we'll call it 4. Okay, we'll round it up. We'll give them more speed, just for the point of my theoretical discussion. 4 megahertz versus 16. Well, they're 1/4 the speed. Now, they're not even that, because we know it's 16 point something. It's a bit faster than 16, and we know it's a bit less than 4. But just for argument's sake, we'll say they're at 1/4 the speed. So that's a pretty significant speed difference versus what might theoretically be 20% in the modern market, and saying it's never been closer. But back in the day, right, so 3.58 megahertz, how did a Super Nintendo put out the same quality of games as a Sega Mega Drive? And so the great game Street Fighter 2, because it came out on all platforms and the cartridges were heavy, the chips, lots of chips. And you put those games in, and so why did a 3.58 megahertz processor do the game more or less the same? I think there's different numbers of frames of animation which might come to RAM, but basically the games were the same. And then you could say there were a lot of games that might have been cross-platform or that came out back in those days. But certainly the capabilities of the system, you wouldn't have ever at one point looked and gone, oh, that platform's lacking over that platform. And that's because of dedicated hardware tricks, right? It's always come down to the dedicated hardware tricks. PlayStation 3 was a nightmare to program for, nightmare. But the processor, okay, so I don't know if it was Lisa Su, she was working at Toshiba, I think, when they were engineering. No, I might have this back to front. She was at IBM when the cell processor was being engineered. And the cell processor, it was sort of in the Apple ecosystem and whatnot, but when it turned up in the PlayStation 3, And it should have been better. It should have been, as I said, two of them. And the PlayStation 3 would have been a better platform, but market chip shortage, they couldn't do it. And it never got the acclaim that the cell processor was due. But it was tricky to program for. Okay, your programmers had to learn to cut their teeth in a parallel programming world. And it wasn't really happening in the PC space. Most people were still on a single core, or possibly going dual hyper-threaded, maybe having multiple threads. And threads